Thanks. Again, welcome everyone to the first of our, so far we have 4 webinars scheduled for this education session. This webinar series is sponsored by MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics and is administered by the Airport Technical Assistance Program, also known as AirTAP. And we are housed at the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. So if you're unfamiliar with us, we began in 2000. It was the first in its nation, first of its kind in the nation, an innovative program offering practical yet specialized training and resources across the state for those who operate, maintain, and administer Minnesota's public use airports. Minnesota's general aviation personnel across the state have had access to targeted information and training to reduce costs and improve the safety, quality, and the overall efficiency of airport operations. AirTAP has also helped airport staff build a community network for exchanging best practices and learning from one another. So we have 4 main service categories. One is education and training. Similar to a lot of these webinars we've been putting on, we also help facilitate the annual Minnesota Airport Conference. It's held every April. We provide technical assistance, access to experts, and we have a variety of resources and printed materials, including guidebooks that you can download from our website, as well as a quarterly briefings newsletter. As I mentioned, this is one of several webinars coming up. As of now, we have these 4 scheduled. You're in one today, and then we have one coming up on November 16th about preparing for 2024 with the FAA, and then there's 2 more one in January, the FAA policy, and then in February, FAA aftergrad. So all of these webinars are recorded and they are saved on our website. And if you are new to Zoom, just a brief overview along the bottom is a black ribbon that contains all the icons for the Zoom experience. You can mute, there's a mute bar, it's automatically muted. You can unmute yourself if you want to have more of a conversation with the speakers today, but I do encourage you to wait until the end with that type of interaction. Feel free to share your video, especially when the screen's not being shared. Otherwise, you can just keep it turned off. You can see all the participants who are attending today. You can also chat. So if you have a question, please, I really encourage you to enter it into the chat so we don't lose it throughout the presentation. Share screen's enabled for everyone, so you don't have to worry about that. And again, I'm recording it, and there are a bunch of reactions that you can use throughout the presentation as well. And so that's all I have. And so I'm going to be handing it over to Jake Martin with the FAA.
All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Catherine. Give me 1 second here while I share my screen. Welcome to everybody. Just a quick introduction to myself and Jason. My name is Jake Martin. I'm the Deputy Manager of the Dakota, Minnesota Airports District Office. If you're not familiar, our office is split with one office in Minneapolis and one office in Bismarck. So I'm in Minnesota, and Jason is in Bismarck. I've been with the FAA since about 2015, and as a program manager primarily, and before that worked for the Minnesota's Department of Transportation and their aeronautics office and airport development. Civil engineer by education and training, also a proud Army Reserve member and Army engineer on the military side, and really love aviation. Jason has been with the FAA for a little over 5 years. He was with Braun Intertech before that, and I mentioned he does reside out in Bismarck. We're going to cover a little bit about fiscal year 23 grants in review, some challenges and things that we've seen. And really the bulk of that is related to BABA, or the Build America, Buy America Act that Congress has gone through different iterations of Buy America, and the BABA acronym is kind of the newest executive order issued by the president just a couple of years ago. And definitely a source of frustration probably sometimes. So we're trying to get some information out, kind of the challenges we've seen with many aspects of 23 grants to help prepare you for any fiscal year 24 grants that are coming up. So our brief agenda is just to cover the FAA's grant e-signature process. This will be very fast. It's very just causes some additional work and manual on our end. We're trying to get ahead of that a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about some land grant and grant lessons learned. And then that's the next phase. We'll get into the Buy America. And again, just a reminder, the Dakota, Minnesota office, Airports District Office, or ADO, handles all 3 states, all the blue dots and airports that you see there. And so we're really here to help you with your grants and any technical assistance you might need from the Federal Aviation Administration. So e-signatures. E-signatures were great when they rolled out. We rolled them out in 2020 when the pandemic hit. We needed a electronic process because it was a paper. We all went home to work, and getting back to the office to print, to mail, it was a real challenge. So this tool came out, it was very great. It really allowed almost a near seamless transition from paper grants to e-signatures. But we have come kind of a few years into it now. We're seeing some challenges, and the biggest challenge we're seeing is with our e-signature system and updating the email addresses, which go out, which then triggers the system to send it out to you. And the biggest thing I want to highlight here is that it is a manual process for the FAA. Every time we get an update from you, we have to go into the system and manually type in the new emails and things. We wish it was a little more modern, where it would allow an account to be created, kind of like DocuSign. If you've ever done a mortgage or closed a mortgage, you're kind of familiar with that DocuSign system. You create an account and then you update your information. It's not as slick as that. It is manual. So usually we send this form out on the right side of the screen here to you and ask you to update it. And we try to get that once a year, but we're starting to see that there are changes that are happening within the year. Some specific cases we've seen are URL changes with email servers. So maybe your airport or city staff are going from a .com, a username at .com email handle to @CI for city or @co for county, and those are starting to fall through the cracks. So then what happens on our end is that we have your old email on file that we put into the system, the grant goes out and we get a bounce back or gets rejected, and then requires us to actually have to file a IT ticket with the contractors who support this program. And they're handling all 3,000 airports grant, the e-signature process for all 3,000 grants across the country. So you can imagine how that, every time we have to do an IT ticket, that really gets things bogged down. So we're really trying to get ahead of that and avoid that, because it does delay grants. And as many of you have experienced, depending on the program and how we're authorized and appropriated, we could be issuing grants at the last couple of weeks of the fiscal year, which any kind of hiccup or any kind of delay puts us at risk of not getting the grant executed by us, you, and your attorney that has to certify at the very end by September 30th. So we're just trying to highlight how important it is to update us anytime that there's a change on the city side, whether it's a contracted city attorney. Sometimes that happens. They're not city employees directly. They're a contracted law firm. Anytime there's a personnel change, an email change, a URL, please get in touch with your program manager to update us with this form. And elections, fall elections around November, and then when those offices are seated in January, those are common times that we try to catch it. But if anything changes, as we get into June, July, August, please let us know so we can catch it and keep the system moving quickly and get grants executed as fast as possible. A little bit about land grants lessons learned. We have some concerns about some of the land grants that we have under grant right now that maybe go back a few years, and we just wanted to call attention to some of the special conditions that are in your land grants, in case you're not aware of them or don't remember what it entails. So these are special condition 29, 31, and 37 are 3 of the most common land grants that are land special conditions that'll show up if you go in. The numbering 29, 31, 37 isn't always the same because it depends on if there's any that are removed or added ahead of these ones. So If you have a land grant, you will have these 3 special conditions, just the numbering might be different. Most important thing I want to key in on is the yellow highlighted area is the title evidence. So we are actually not allowed to make you any payments on any parcels until you've satisfied to us that there's no liens, encumbrances, reservations, or exceptions, which are going to cause an interference with the use and operation of the airport. So we have had some cases where we've purchased land and we are in the process of closing out the grant, and we find there's some agricultural easements, growing crops that we didn't know about. And as you know, if you have crops on your airport, you know that some crops are okay and some are not. Kind of depends on how close they are to the runway, how tall they are. So in our opinion, depending if that easement allows the farmer to grow any kind of crops and any distance up to the runway safety area edge, that could be a risk or an interference with the use of the airport. We've had some other cases too. And so we've also had cases where we've reimbursed land before this special condition has been satisfied, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it does cause some issues on our end with the grant administration and grant closeout. The updated approved Exhibit A. So most airports, I think, are aware of this special condition. It's anytime you have a land project proposed, we'll mention that you have to update your Exhibit A to account for that. That's in there. Usually not as a deal breaker anymore now that there's a lot of experience and information about Exhibit A's. And then 37 is what I was mentioning, ties to 29, is that we're not allowed to reimburse you, and technically you as the sponsor are not allowed to ask for payment until you've recorded the grant agreement at the county and all the grant assurances, and that you are basically certifying there's no liens or encumbrances on that property. And just a reminder, the AirTAP program itself is what's kind of termed in the federal government as a sponsor certification program. So all of the responsibility and all the onus of complying with all the statute regulations and requirements and the grant itself fall to the sponsor with limited oversight from the FAA. We are, of course, interested in helping you. We're here for support, and we can offer assistance, guidance, information, phone calls, emails, whatever it takes to help clear up the mud, if you will, or get through the fog of what some of this stuff means. But ultimately, it's the sponsor that's responsible for all the special conditions of the grant and whether or not payments are made when they shouldn't be, or when title evidence hasn't been satisfied. So our specific challenges, pipeline easements, utility easements for gas pipelines, oil pipelines, electrical pipeline, or electrical conduits. We've had them on airports, and in this specific picture here, you can see it runs really close to a glide slope, and that's a federal glide slope, which you can imagine would be a very difficult situation should that gas pipeline owner decide to go in and trench through that area, if they have the right to do so, which they may if it's an old enough easement. Could cause issues with the glide slope. And if you know anything about glide slopes, they rely on a reflective plane off the ground to bounce off and back into the air to be received by the aircraft to follow that approach slope to the end of the runway. So you can imagine if they started digging in front of the glide slope, that could be a pretty big deal, both for the operation of the airport, the operation of the ILS, and potentially trigger reimbursable agreements with tech ops if there are any of their buried cables, power, communication lines in front of that glide slope. So that could be a pretty big deal if you as the airport don't have the subordination in place that they can't do anything without your okay and your blessing. Mineral resources. We've had some cases, successful cases of getting them extinguished with the help of MnDOT and the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. But there have been cases where mining rights have been on airport property, and they go back quite a while, and the mines may or may not have had access or the right to be able to dig up the runway at any time they wanted to get at whatever minerals resources are underneath there. I already mentioned agricultural easements. We've had crops that can be an issue. We've also had irrigation easements to operate, the big irrigation pipes that, walk their way through a field or are circular if they're on a pivot. We've had cases where those are on the airport, which are then an obstruction to the approach surfaces on the runway end. And we've talked about utility easements, but also the utility work that may or may not occur on your airport may impact environmental commitments for some of the other projects you're working on. You may have a project ongoing where you're committed to tribal monitoring of the excavation for, say, a hangar or an arrival departure building, and unbeknownst to you, the utility company has a power line that goes through your area, and they have the right to come in and just start excavating a trench, and that may conflict with your commitment to the tribal monitors to have them monitor all excavation that's occurring on your airport for that project. And it may just muddy the water on what is your project or what's your responsibility. So we just want to call attention to these land grants, which are starting to become a pretty big challenge for us as far as these unrecorded and on these easements or encumbrances that are on the property that are going to limit your control of your own airport. And why it's important, I mean, I listed a few other ones, but probably the most famous example in the state is this Highway 53 project. We want to avoid a situation like this where the mining company has the right to come in and relocate a highway at significant cost to get at their mineral resources. And that ties into your requirements or your grant assurances for having an airport with compatible land use, meaning whatever you're allowing on the airport is compatible with the airport and aviation activity, and that there's not going to be a risk to safety or a risk to your investment as a city or airport or even the federal or state investments that have been in there. It's also pretty important because it's becoming an issue for period of performance. Period of performance is a federal regulation that requires the FAA to close grants in a certain period of time. And we have some grants now that are potentially pushing the very limit of the statute, which if we go back and look at the guidance that's in period of performance and the regulation, it actually requires that the FAA unilaterally close a grant when we reach this doomsday end date, whatever that is. And it's different for every grant based on the fiscal year it started and when it was signed. And we have some dates. We have dates that we can publish if you have a question about that. But it basically requires us to close the grant with the information we have as of the date of this end date, which may mean we're not able to make the final payment on a grant that we would normally have reimbursed you for land purchase, because we don't have these special conditions satisfied. We don't have the information that certifies you have good title to your land. So that is becoming a pretty big issue for us, and we're trying to get ahead of that and avoid that for some of these future land grants. And then, of course, compliance. Just as I mentioned, you're required to operate that airport in accordance with all federal regulations and requirements. And anytime there's a hiccup to that, that's technically a compliance violation. We have been not investigating compliance directly, except making you aware of it. Most airports that we talk to, when there's an issue, they're happy to address them in an informal manner, which is great for us too. We really want to avoid any kind of formal compliance investigations or compliance proceedings, but it does happen and can happen, and we just try to work hard to avoid that. So again, bringing these things to your attention so we can get grants closed, get as quick as we can, get you reimbursed as quick as you can, and have really compatible land use at your airport. So those are some of the challenges we've seen with e-signatures and land grants. Now, just kind of looking at our submittal timelines that are pretty typical for coming up in this year. The dates on the right aren't mandated by the FAA, so I just want to put a disclaimer out there. I'm not setting policy, but these are just best practice dates that I've personally used and a lot of program managers are using. We're looking for your environmental assessment to be complete by October 1st. CADX's simple written records you can work with your program manager and environmental protection specialist directly on what that looks like for a project that's not an EA. And then airspace, if you're building new structures, that should really be done before October 1st so that you know if there's airspace impacts for your project, or if you have to redesign or move or shift or locate that building or structure somewhere else. And we're already coming up to our pre-application deadline of October 21st. And that really kicks off our year for the checkpoints that we're looking for internally. And all of these checkpoints are really to make the program manager and our management team comfortable that the grant you're working on or the project you're working on is going to meet all the federal requirements and meet what we anticipate will eventually be the Federal Register notice of the application deadline, which typically is in June or July. So we never know that date ahead of time. It's typically about that time. And so all of these dates are just to line you up, make sure you're progressing and that you've got everything checked out, reviewed, approved, and ready for the FAA to actually issue a grant come July, August, September. Just a reminder, bids are required to issue grants, and one of the other challenges we've had in this last year is sometimes bidding too early and not having those bids held or valid until the end of the fiscal year. We know right now it's a huge challenge with the cost increases that are going on with the contractors. We know that they sometimes only have days or weeks to hold their supplier prices. And so it's a challenge, but rebidding costs are not AIP eligible. So if you did decide, you're working with your contractor who is a apparent low bidder and you don't have the grant yet, and they're threatening to pull out or need to rebid, that is a local decision you may have to make. But it is important to have bids as long as you can so that we can get that grant issued. And we're of course trying, if you meet the deadlines on the right side, we're really trying to get grants out as early as possible. And all these things kind of flow together, including the e-signatures, and what helps us expedite and keep the grants going. Project readiness is something we're going to focus on in the next 12 to 24 months. As far as we can, but we've seen some challenges with what's a ready project. And it's really a new keyword you'll probably hear us start talking about. We have this graphic on the left that Marcus and Gina created in our office to really kind of be a handout or flyer for you to use when you're scoping. Just what kind of questions should you be asking about a runway project or a taxiway project? And really, from our perspective, when we talk about readiness, we're asking is the project complex, and do we know the whole scope? If there's questions that you still can't answer that may affect the scope of the project, whether that be limits of construction, airspace obstructions, whether or not you're moving a nav or a runway end enough to trigger the AD airport data information portal surveying requirements. If you can't equivocally, without question, answer yes or no to any of those questions on a complex project, it's probably not ready for a grant this fiscal year. And we're not saying we're not going to work with you. We're not saying we won't support you. It's just that it might be a better project for the following year when we can get through some of those decisions. And that really leads into, the scope leads into the environmental determination to make sure that we know whether it's a CAD-exable action or if it does trigger an environmental assessment. And then the funding plan. All of these questions are really, we have to make sure when we get to July and you have bids that this project can go forward without any trip ups along the way, either from the federal grant perspective, or even if there's reimbursable agreements or federal nav aids involved. And our goal is really to support every single project. And it's just projects with outstanding questions may need more time. But if we can, triage and separate, it helps us focus on this current year projects. And it lets us get some bandwidth to help focus on every project to the best of our ability as we go into either this year or the following year in 2025. And that completes my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it over to Jason now, and I'll just ask that you hold any questions for me till the end to make sure we can get through the important Build America, Buy America portion. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks. Oh, okay. Let's see how well I can make this work. So yeah, my name is Jason Kroll, like Jake said, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Okay. Where are we at here? So the topics I'm going to try to hit on here, do a little bit of background on the Build America, Buy America Act, and hit on the FAA Buy American website, some waiver review process, and then the
Jason, sorry to interrupt. We don't see your screen.
Okay, give me a second. Not sure why it's not sharing. For some reason, I'm not able to get it to work properly.
If you email it to me, I can get it up for you real quick.
Oh, here, I think I found it. That working?
Yeah, there you go. We got it now.
Okay. All right. So yeah, the topics I want to hit on are touch on the Build America, Buy America Act just briefly. Go through the FAA Buy American website, look at the waiver review process. I want to hit on the forms 136, 137, and then some questions, comments there at the end. Right. So the existing statutes, executive orders, 49 USC sections 50101 talks about the domestic use of materials, and the Reauthorization Act. Not exactly the most important things. The bear with me here, I'm trying to move things around. The FAA waivers are found in the 49 USC, like I mentioned, in those locations. For the FAA, we're required to have 60% or more of the components made in the United States. There are other waivers 2 and 4 we typically have not used. The changes, so for most of the United States, they had to meet 50%. We in FAA are required to meet 60%. So the fact that everyone else had to meet 55% really doesn't matter. We are already meeting the Build America, Buy America requirements. They defined iron and construction materials more clearly through definitions. There's some ambiguity there that they wanted to clarify, so I've got that spelled out. Construction materials, I just hit on that one, includes an article, material, or supply other than an item of primarily iron or steel and manufactured. They have an example here. I want to hit that one next. So on the very bottom bullet there, they have an example would be like, say, plastic framed sliding window should be treated as a manufactured product. Well, if it's a plate of glass, it's considered to be a construction material. That's kind of how they had to redefine some of the items, because there's just a little bit of ambiguity there. The domestic products here I just kind of reiterate the fact that the FAA has been 60% requirements based on our statutes. So we are well into the Build America, Buy America requirements already. So there's no changes in that spot. These are the topics on the FAA American website I want to hit on. The site's very well laid out with up-to-date forms and information. The next few slides are screenshots from the website. And but yeah, those are the if you open up the website, these are the points that'll be on there. The first topic on the website is the Buy American preferences. The 4 waivers are listed there, as well as the statutes that discuss the waivers in more detail. The next sections are links that provide more details for the Build America, Buy America Act information. Additional links for the Buy American guidance to the current airport improvement program manual, as well as the Buy
Yeah, not a
American
problem.
statute, that the FAA is obligated to
Yeah,
follow.
it's a nice little place.
Somebody has to mute their microphone. The required federal contract provisions are also linked. They're actually very well written documents that contains Appendix A4, which contains the most current certification of compliance. The most current form is dated May 24th of 2023. That certification of compliance is what you normally put in your specifications for the bidding. Links to the updated FAA forms 5100, 136, 137 are also on the website. The 136 form went through an update here just this past year. The 137 is still the form it was here from a couple of years ago. I believe those are going to be staying the same for a while. I don't know of any changes coming yet. The waivers issued, comment period closed section is kind of an important one to keep an eye on. That's where the waiver acceptances will be posted. The 2 links, there's a project specific Buy American and a nationwide Buy American waiver. The airports typically are going to be under the project specific Buy American waivers issued. Once the waiver is published on this link, the federal funds for the grant can be released for the equipment or construction. The waivers open for comments will list the projects or equipments, but only by name. No documentation is available. So basically, when we put your project onto the public comment page, you'll see the name of the project for commenting, but you won't see any information that's submitted with it. The confidential information is not placed on there. Okay, so when you do open that waivers issued comment period closed link, there's 2 other links. One will be for a PDF document, the other one will be for a spreadsheet. This is what the PDF will look like. It's the list of equipment or construction projects that have completed the Buy American waiver review and are released for funding. This would be what the spreadsheet would look like. It has the same information and can be filtered for a faster search. But sometimes you want the PDF just to see what other products are out there. This website does have other links as well, like the Buy American related Federal Register notices and other related resources. Let's see. If the grant is awarded prior to the waiver being completed, there's a risk that the grant may not be sufficient should the waiver fall short and the second bidder selected. Let me go into a little bit more detail here. This is basically the process. I'll start there from conception of the project to the waiver being issued and the grant being issued. So you have the project formulation, preliminary planning actions, preliminary project approval, your procurement bid process is initiated, bids are opened, Buy American certification of compliance is reviewed. The winning bidder is identified. The bidder that's selected or given the notice that they have a low bid, submits the Buy American waiver forms for review. The Buy American waiver process then is completed, and then the grant award is issued. So what I was making comments about earlier about if a grant is awarded prior to the waiver being completed, the waiver may fall short and not meet the 60% requirement. And then you go to the second low bid, and that may be more than what the grant is worth. So that's why the it's best to follow this process to make sure there's no funding shortfalls. This slide is kind of a depiction of the Form 136 and 137, how they tie to one another. The left side, the content percentage worksheet, the costs provided do not include labor or retail markups. It's kind of an important thing to keep in mind there. We've had some come in where they have the retail markups, but we cannot accept that. The levels are listed on the form on the very left side, the level of the product. Like if it's a final product, to be a 0, usually it's the name of the project itself. They don't have components, that would be level 1, and subcomponents of level 2. I have an example of that here later on. The right side represents the form 137, the 5100 137, or basically the final question final assembly questionnaire. The form displays the efforts of the American workers or labor costs performed within the United States. It basically gathers all the labor put forth in either construction or equipment development. And kind of an overall Buy American waiver process overview. So the bid will be submitted with the certification of compliance signed, indicating the Buy American waiver will be needed or not. If they mark it 100% meeting Buy American requirements, the waiver is not needed. But typically we've seen a lot of type 3 requests, type 3 waiver requests, and that's where we go into the next sections here. Once the bid is awarded, an apparent low bidder has been contacted. The low bidder will put together the confidential Buy American waivers, if needed, and submit to the FAA's program manager. To expect that every contractor bidding on a project is going to fill out the Form 136, 137 is not realistic unless they are announced that they're the low bidder and they're being sought after for the contract. The FAA will review the documents, either submit a letter of acceptance to the FAA region or headquarters, FAA region and headquarters for further review, to reach back out to the contractor for clarifications if they're needed. And there's so many different things to look at and consider. There's not a one size fits all situation. Once the letter of acceptance has been approved by the region and headquarters, the project is placed on the FAA website for 10 business days for public comment. The project name will be published on the comment period closed website after the 10-day public comment period is closed. So there's when you fill out those forms 136, 137, we review them. Region headquarters accepts them, then they place it onto this public website for 10 business days. Sometimes that period of the review of headquarters and region, it can be more than just overnight. It can be a week, or I want to say it's less than 15 days, but it gets onto that website for the 10-day public comment. Again, the public comment, all you're going to see is the name of the project. They're not going to see the documents that are submitted that are considered confidential. And once it's published on that website, then the Buy American review process is considered complete and the federal funding is released for the grant. So the information on the Buy American forms is, like I said, confidential and proprietary. Once it's published and submitted through the bidding package for public bid opening, here's the danger. The information is no longer protected by the Freedom of Information Act. So we've seen where contractors are asked to provide Form 136 and 137 through the bidding package. That is not the intent of the program. The intent is to just have them sign off saying if they're going to be 100% Buy American requirements, or if they're wanting a type 3 waiver. Let's see. By sending that information through the bidding package, they cannot avoid the Freedom of Information Act. Another point to keep in mind is that when the manufacturer submits the confidential information to the sponsor, that information may be open to state public records law. So again, the whole point is keep it confidential. So please don't be requesting that they submit the forms 136 and 137 to either the sponsor or through the bidding package. And bear in mind, try to complete the forms with an auditor in mind, or complete this work with an auditor in mind. Because if an auditor does pick it up, they're going to want to have answers or ask questions to find answers. See, the forms needed to complete the buying record process are basically certificate of compliance, the form 136, form 137, the acceptance letter, and then finally the publication on the website under a comment period closed, so that that way you know that the waiver is complete. Okay, this is an illustration of what is considered final assembly manufacturing. This has kind of been a bigger issue for the Form 137. What's considered to be basically final assembly. Final assembly is defined as a substantial transformation of material into a new component and or subcomponent into a new and different article of commerce with a name, character, or use distinct from that of the article or articles for which it was so transformed, including quality control. Final assembly is not defined as putting basically like a box on the back of an already assembled truck, a loader on a payloader, or tires on a completed manufactured machine at a dealership location. So, to kind of sum it all up here, it's kind of wordy, but the actual definition is in that square on the right-hand side. I kind of read through that, but just bear in mind, the final assembly is not, like I made a comment of, it's not putting the tires back on the machine right in the dealership's parking lot, or just kind of wrapping things up. It's starting from what materials are going into it, the smelting, the pulling the wood. Where's the wood coming from? If you're making truss rafters, etc. That's all considered to be part of the final assembly. You use the pieces to make the components or subcomponents, and then those subcomponents being all put together as the final components. So that the whole process basically is considered what final assembly, or what's intended by final assembly. If the Form 137 does not demonstrate these key factors, we'll be reaching back out to the manufacturer or contractor for clarity. There have been cases where the materials Form 136 has met content requirements, but the manufacturing process was not substantially shown to be within the United States or by Americans. So this slide here, I'm basically going into the reviewing of the final assembly questionnaire. Is the manufacturing process involved, showing the components and subcomponents, seemingly the different stages of manufacturing occur. Make sure it's showing the quality control testing, using materials list in the accompanying 136 sheet. Manufacturing has been taking place within the United States. Manufacturing has taken place by the skilled workers in America, and the cost of manufacturing reflects the skilled American labor. Don't put the cost in the Form 136, put it onto this Form 137. Okay, here's get into some of the examples that we're talking about here. So in the 136, basically what's new from the Build America, Buy America is the very right-hand side. Country of origin has to be listed now. And most times it's basically the two-letter abbreviation for the country. There's there's a website that says what the country's two-letter abbreviation is. But either list the country or the two-letter abbreviation, the levels 0, 1, 2, like in this case, we're looking at a snow removal equipment and plow attachment. Level 1 would be like a chassis, engine, the frame, a cab, or the attachment itself. A level 2 would be like it's showing there, the control system within the cab. Or say if it's a snow blower attachment, you may break out if it has the blower has its own engine, or if it's you know, a PTO power takeoff attachment or etc. That might be a level 2 below that as well. But the columns are basically what we're looking for is the percentage of content in the United States. So you would show the foreign content and then list the country. If there's no foreign content, just say not applicable, and continue on that way. Complete the sheet. Here's another example here. The first example is of equipment. This is of a building. So there's a little bit of comic relief in this form, but just work way through here. But there again, you know, you have your levels of 0, 1, and 2. You know, structural steel would be a level 1. The terminal building itself would be a level 0. Windows would be a level 1. Your HVAC system depends on how big it is. Some of the HVAC systems we ask to be broken out a little bit more, like the electrical panel, blowers, such so on and so forth. In this case, 25,000. It's not a whole lot there. Maybe a smaller building. But you'll notice at level 2 there, we have something called a statute listed. So something to keep in mind is showing an item on the Buy American form, even if it is like partially not made in America or not made in America at all, does not mean that that is eligible for federal funding. If it's not eligible for federal funding, we would recommend you just don't put it on the form. Because when you show an ineligible item in American form, you know, let's say the statute was all foreign, that would hurt the content. In this case, it appears like they may have been trying to help the content to meet the 60%, but there's clearly enough dollars here showing it wasn't necessary. So if it's basically not going to be funded by federal funding, probably leave it off the forms. I'm just going to go through questions, final comments. Before I take questions, though, I want to just throw out a few more things that we've been finding for some background. Like when we started doing the reviews, they did take a while, but there's a lot of learning going on. So the learning curve is kind of steep, but you know, communication between the FAA and manufacturers, contractors has improved, which has helped everyone through the curve and getting things done quicker. We had one case where a change order came up, and it's kind of a rare situation. In this situation, the manufacturer that did the piece of equipment sold out to another manufacturing company. In that case, we have to start the Buy American review over, because these are project specific Buy American waivers. So then we'd have to look at the new manufacturer's product, because the previous manufacturer that sold the company the product may be different. Something else to keep in mind is some of the equipment can be funded, like snow removal equipment could be funded through states funds, local funds, PFCs, or there's another possibility, and that's through the U.S. General Services Administration, GSA.gov. They oftentimes will have equipment on inventory that the airports can get a hold of for less money. If you are more interested in that, just let me know. Okay. What we have seen for snow removal equipment is the larger the machine, typically more likely they will meet the Buy American requirements. Case in point, like John Deere, Caterpillar, those are probably two that have to be watched the closest. They usually hover right around that 61 percentile point. And sometimes they just can't quite cross that line, and sometimes they get across it. But every year seems to be a little different. It just kind of depends on how the components come together to make the machine. They've tried to explain to me in the past, and I'm not an expert on it. Just know that they have bids out for different components to build the machines, and depending on how the bid turns out for that time period or that many pieces being constructed, makes an impact on whether or not they make it through that 60% threshold. So we have also had airports that construct buildings without a singular prime or general contractor. In those cases, each contractor is required to submit a Buy American waiver. If the waiver for that particular contract does not meet the 60% threshold, the federal funding for that contract is not eligible. So if you have a number of different contractors without a singular prime or general, or somebody trying to coordinate all of it, putting it all together into one Buy American form, you may find that some of the work on that structure is not eligible for federal funding. Another thing to do is we've seen is if you try to split out the non-conforming work within that contract, it's considered to be a change order, and that you run the risk of potential bid protests on that contract. So it's something I'll kind of hold balance on, keep in mind. A way through the multiple contracts would be like a CMAR approach, or just use a prime. So that's pretty much all I have. I'll leave the last few minutes here for any questions you might have. Go from there.
Well, feel free to unmute yourself or enter it in the chat. Well, as you guys are thinking of, if you have any questions, I just really want to thank Jake and Jason for taking the time to put the presentation together and to deliver this today. It was wonderful and highly valuable information. I guess everyone knows how to reach you too. I'm sure they're very familiar with your emails and your contacts in your offices. So, you know, if you have questions coming up after this, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them through email or phone calls at any time. So again, I just really want to thank Jake and Jason. Thank you everyone for spending an hour this morning with us and participating in these webinars. Your attendance is really valuable to us. Later today, I'll be sending out a thank you email containing a link to the survey. So if you can take a few minutes just to say a few thoughts, this helps us formate our schedule for next year. So again, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.